All right, so today let me start reviewing for the test. We do have a test this Friday. There's more information coming up. So let me start with question number 9. We're going to simplify each expression. So let me take a look at 9 through 12. We're going to learn how to simplify. So first factor, the way we know how to factor. So on the top, I just have m minus 9. There's nothing I can do. Now at the bottom, m squared minus 10m plus 9. Factor using the x thing we used to do, the diamond they call, or synthetic division. You should get m minus 1, m minus 10. M minus 9. Now, if you're wondering, how did I do this? I was looking at two numbers that multiplied equals 9, but when I add them, it's equal to negative 10. So negative 1, negative 9. That's how I got these. Now, let me cancel any common factors. The m minus 9 with the m minus 9 cancel out. So at the bottom, I have n minus 1. The top, I cannot leave it empty. Now, the way I will type this, a 1 on the top over m minus 1 at the bottom. Make sure you use your parentheses. Now, looking at the top, on question number 10, let me just leave the 4n. Nothing I can do. Now, here are only two terms. Let me divide, in this case, let me divide each of them by 2. So that gives me 7n plus 10. Now, the factor that I just took out, the 4 over 2, that basically becomes a 2 on the top. So on the top, I have 2n. At the bottom, I have 7n plus 10. You can simplify more only if all these numbers can be divided by the same thing. Keep in mind, I'm saying all of them, not just any two, all of them. In this case, because we cannot, that's my answer. So the way I will type this will be 2n over 7n plus 10. Let's take a look at number 11. I'm going to factor the top. If I can. In this case, I cannot. So just m minus 7. At the bottom, I only have two terms. I'm thinking, can I divide both numbers by numbered? In this case, I can divide both of them by 8. So it gives me m minus 7. Cancel the m minus 7 with the m minus 7. So I have 8 at the bottom. The top, I cannot leave it empty. So I get 1 over 8. The way I will type that, 1 over 8. All right, let's take a look at number 12. Nothing I can do on the top, n minus 6. The bottom, I can divide each of my terms by 5n. So that gives me 1n minus 6. Cancel the n minus 6. So I have 1 over 5n. That way I will type this 1 over 5n. Okay, so that was just when I only had one fraction. Factor whatever you can. Cancel the common factors. Make sure the common factors are 1 on top, 1 at the bottom. Now let's take a look at question number 13 through 16. Those are multiplication. What I'm going to do, I'm gonna factor the top of my first fraction. In my mind, I'm thinking two numbers that multiplied equals negative 8. When I add them is equal to negative 7. So I'm gonna get p minus 8, p plus 1. Now at the bottom, I just have a p plus 1 times. My second fraction, I have 1 over p plus 1. Nothing I can do. Now let me cancel common factors. This p plus 1 on the top with a p plus 1 at the bottom. Any of the two p plus 1s that I have. Now nothing I can do. So on the top, I have a p minus 8. Right? The times 1, the 1 basically I ignore it because I'm not going to multiply by 1. So I just have p minus 8 over p plus 1. The way I will type this, p minus 8 over p plus 1. Let's take a look at number 14. Factored what you can to begin with. I'm thinking two numbers that multiplied equals 49, but when I add them is equal to negative 14. So negative 7, negative 7. I'm literally going to write r minus 7 twice. I'm not going to do to the second power, r minus 7 squared. I'm literally going to write r minus 7 twice. The bottom is just r minus 7 times 1 over 8r squared. Now the r minus 7 with the r minus 7 cancel out. So on the top, remember the one I'm going to ignore because multiplication times 1 does nothing. So I have r minus 7 over 8r squared. Now the way I will type this, r minus 7 over, make sure you use parentheses, over 8r to the second. Now let's take a look at number 15. Let me factor what I can. The first fraction, I just have 9a over, at the bottom I can divide both of them by a 10. So I have a minus 7 times. On the second fraction, let me divide each of them by 10. So I have a minus 8 over 9a. Now this 10 with this 10 cancel out. Remember, I have to choose one from the top, one from the bottom. This 9/8 from the top with this 9/8 from the bottom cancel out. So I have a minus 8 over a minus 7. I cannot cancel those a's because a minus 8 is a whole thing. When there's a plus or minus, I have to cancel a minus 8 altogether. Not just the a, the whole thing. So that's what I get. The way I will type this, open parentheses, a minus 8 over a minus 7. Now let's take a look at the question number 16. The top is just a 1, nothing I can do. Now the bottom, remember two numbers that multiplied equals negative 42, but when I add them is equal to negative 1. I'm thinking v minus 7, v plus 6. My second fraction multiplied equals negative 42, added equals negative 1. So I'm going to have v minus 7, v plus 6 over v minus 5. Now this v minus 7 with this v minus 7 cancel out. This v plus 6 with this v plus 6 cancel out. Now some of you guys could have said, could I just cancel all that with all that? It's the exact same thing. Sure. So at the end, I have a 1 on the top. I'm writing the 1 because I cannot leave the top empty. Over v minus 5. The way I will type this, 1 over v minus 5. Now let's take a look at division. Question 17 through 20. Now in division, my first fraction, let me factor it, if I can. I have 6 over b minus 3 times. I know it says division, but I'm changing it to times. But the second fraction, I'm going to flip. So for the top of the first fraction, I'm looking at 56b minus 40. Let me divide each of them by 8. So that gives me 7b minus 5 over. At the bottom, in this case for the bottom, I'm looking at 42b minus 30. Let me divide each of those by 6. So 42 divided by 6, that gives me 7b. 30 divided by 6 gives me 5. Remember, the second fraction I must flip. Now I see the 7b minus 5 with the 7b minus 5 cancel out. This 6 with this 6 cancel out. So I have an 8 over b minus 3. The way I will type it will be 8 over b minus 3. Let's take a look at number 18. The first fraction, I have 7v over v plus 5 times. Remember, I'm going to flip the second fraction. So right now for the top, I'm looking at 9v squared plus 45v. I said, well, numbers-wise, I can divide each by 9. Letter-wise, I can take a v out. So let me divide each of them by 9v. That gives me v plus 5 over. Now for the bottom, I'm looking at 7v. I'm just going to write 7v. The 7v with the 7v cancel out. The v plus 5 with the v plus 5 cancel out. So I have 9v on the top. I have nothing at the bottom. I'm not going to write the bottom over 1 because the bottom can be ignored. So it's not a fraction anymore. So my answer is just 9v. The way I will type this, because it's not a fraction anymore, just 9v. Let's take a look at number 19. My first fraction, the top, I cannot factor it, so I'm just going to leave x plus 4 over. Now, at the bottom, I have 3 terms, so thinking 2 numbers are multiplied equals negative 40. When I add them, is equal to negative 6. So I'm going to call this x minus 10, x plus 4 times. Remember, I must flip the second fraction. So for the top, I'm looking at 7x squared. For the bottom, I'm looking at 1. All right, the x plus 4 with the x plus 4 cancel out. This one at the bottom, I'm going to ignore. So I have 7x squared over x minus 10. The way I will type it will be 7x squared over x minus 10. Let's take a look at number 20. My first fraction is just 8 over x minus 3. Nothing I can do. Times the second fraction. Remember, I'm going to flip it. I'm going to do the reciprocal. So I'm looking at the bottom. That's what's going to go on top. I notice that each of those I can divide by 9x. So I'm going to get x minus 3. Now, at the bottom, from each of those, I can factor a 9x. And I'm going to get x minus 5. All right, so the 9x with the 9x cancel out. The x minus 3 with the x minus 3 cancel out. So I have 8 over x minus 5. The way I will type it will be 8 over x minus 5. Not bad so far. Now for number 21 through 24, I'm going to simplify fractions over another fraction. So for these, I'm looking at LCD, least common denominator. Least common denominator. So I look at my denominators. Numbers wise, 5 and 9. The smallest number that they both go into is 45. Letter wise, I must have an x, because I must include all my denominators. All right, so let me multiply each of my fractions or each of my terms by 45x. That's my LCD. Now here, this x with this x cancel out. So I'm just paying attention on the top. Those x's cancel out. So 45 times 1 gives me 45. Now here, 45 divided by 5 is 9. So I have 3 times 9x. That gives me plus 27x. At the bottom, 45 divided by 9 is 5. So I have x times 5 times x. So it's going to give me 5x squared. Now the top, combine any like terms if possible. If not, let's write it with the highest exponent first. So 27x plus 45 over 5x squared. I could simplify more if all these numbers, all of them, not just any two, all of them, I can divide them by the same thing. Or if I could remove an x from all of them. In this case, I cannot. So that's basically my answer. Now, so that's my answer. So now what I'm going to do, the way you will type it will be on the top, I have 27x plus 45 over 5x squared. All right, let's take a look at number 22. All right, I see some terms in there, so let me factor each of them. I have a 4 on the top. Now, x squared minus 4x, I'm just going to factor that as an x minus 4. My second fraction, I have x and over x minus 4. In between the fractions, I'm going to put a plus. It was a minus, but I'm going to put a plus. The negative sign, I'm going to distribute it to the top over x minus 4 over x. So I'm factoring it because I'm going to look for my LCD. I'm looking at my denominators. So my LCD, my least common denominator, looking at the first fraction, I must have an x, and I must have an x minus 4. Looking at the second fraction, I already have the x minus 4. Looking at the third fraction, I already have an x. Okay, so let me multiply each of my fractions by x and x minus 4. Multiply by x and x minus 4. Each of my fractions. Now in the first fraction, the x with the x cancel out. The x minus 4 with the x minus 4 cancel out. So I just have a 4. Looking at the second fraction, the x minus 4 with the x minus 4. Now negative x times x is going to give me negative x squared. Here at the bottom, the x with the x cancel out. So I must multiply x minus 4 times x minus 4. So let me distribute the x first. The first x, so the x from the first parentheses to the second parentheses, that's going to give me x squared minus 4x. Now let me distribute the negative 4. That's going to give me negative 4x plus 16. So on the top, I have 4 minus x squared. At the bottom, I have x squared minus 8x plus 16. Actually, on the top, let me rewrite that as negative x squared plus 4. The reason why is the highest exponent comes first. So negative x squared plus 4. At the bottom, I have x squared minus 8x plus 16. That's my answer. The way I will type it will be, let me open parentheses, negative x to the second plus 4 over x to the second minus 8x plus 16 in close parentheses. No spaces. All right, let's take a look at a couple more. I'm looking at denominators only. All right, factor if you can. Now I'm looking at denominators only. My m squared at the bottom is not a fraction, so I'm not looking at the denominator there. So my LCD, my least common denominator, I must have a 25 from the first fraction. I must have an m squared from the second fraction. So in this case, let me multiply everything by 25m squared. So 25m squared. My minus in between my fractions, I'll change it to a plus, and I'll distribute the negative to the top of the first fraction. So looking at the first fraction, the 25 with the 25 cancel out. So 2 times m squared, I get 2m squared. Here, the m squared with the m squared cancel out. Negative 4 times 25, that gives me negative 100 over 25 m to the fourth. Now here, that's basically what I have. I look at my numbers. Can I divide them all by the same thing? I cannot. Looking at my letters, can I factor a letter out? I cannot. So my answer will be, on the top I have 2m squared minus 100 over the bottom I have 25m to the fourth. All right, now let's take a look at number 24. Factor things out if you can. Simplify fractions if you can. Now I'm looking at my denominators. So I must look at my LCD, my least common denominator. Numbers wise, 2 and 9, the smallest number that they both go into is 18. Letter wise, I must have an x because there's an x in one of my denominators. So my LCD is 18x. Let me multiply each of my fractions by 18x. So looking on here, this x with this x cancel out. 18 divided by 2 is 9. So on the top of that fraction, I have 81. Right, 9 times 9. Now here, 18 divided by 9 is 2. So if you notice, I have 2 times 4 times x. So that's going to give me 8x. On the second fraction, 18 divided by 9 is 2. So it's going to give me plus 8x. So I have that 81 over 16x. The way I will type it will be 81 over 16x. Now there's going to be 10 questions in the test. From this part, just a fraction, you simplify it, we're going to have one of it. Multiplication, you're going to have one of it. Division, you're going to have one question of division. A fraction over another fraction, you're going to have one of it. So for today's homework, you got 20 questions. For the test, that's already 4 questions on the test. There's a total of 10. We're going to go over the remaining 6 tomorrow. Any questions, feel free to email me.